Howdy, and welcome to the Feed Bandit podcast, where we talk all things hunting and introduce you to the most innovative hunting gear and services. Here are your hosts, Jimmy Byrne and Richard Kinchlow.
Howdy, folks. Corn Bandit coming back at you with another Feed Bandit podcast. Wanted to first and foremost, before we get things rolling here tonight, to apologize to all of our faithful listeners. I know we've been a little lax when it comes to getting these done, and we apologize. We've gotten your emails and your social media messages and whatnot, and we are sorry. We are getting back on the high horse, especially with the season being days away now. The dove season, that is, just really, really cool. So again, we are sorry. In an effort to prove on that, we're going to start right here, right now. One of the things I like to do, when the season's coming, or just really anytime really, is to read up on the sport that I love, and the animals that we pursue. And one of those obviously is going to be ducks. One of the articles that I found and I posted on our social media, I guess it was a couple days ago, was an article by Ducks Unlimited. Their chief scientist, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tom Mormon, apparently wrote did write a really nice piece on waterfowl, and it's titled "Are Waterfowl Migrations Changing?" And it really talks about a bunch of factors and whatnot that dictate when ducks decide to make the pilgrimage south, and where they decide to go, what pushes them. All kinds of major factors in here. So I've got this printed out, and I've read it about 20,000 times, and I seem to find something new every single time. So wanted to kind of go through this with you all tonight, and I think it's a really good piece. So go check it out. Again, it's entitled "Are Waterfowl Migrations Changing?" by Dr. Tom Mormon. And we've got on our website. So he's got it kind of broken up here, if you will, into major sections. The first one's called weather, and so I'm gonna read little excerpts from it, and then we can talk about it. So really, he kind of talks about the effects of old man winter, is what he calls it, and how this really pushes all the birds north, and he's really saying in this that. He goes on to say, really, with the exception for a few species that are hardwired for more dependable long-distance migration, such as blue-winged teal, my favorite, waterfowl are adapted to migrate only as far as necessary for them to find food, water, open water, and places to rest. For some species, it may take several consecutive days of freezing temperatures and snow cover to push them south. While freezing temperatures and snow cover food sources, waterfowl linger. It's advantageous for them, big word, I guess they speak French, for them to reduce the risk of mortality from migration and remain closer to their breeding areas, especially for mallards and northern pintails. That was absolutely fascinating to me because, I was kind of under the impression that a lot of the puddle ducks, I knew that the teal, and I've always said that, the blue-winged teal being a puddle duck, that the first sign of cool weather, they're up and gone. In fact, just a couple of days ago here in North Texas, I think we were sitting somewhere about 5 o'clock at about 104, and it dropped to 77 with a substantial cold front and a thunderstorm. And I guarantee you some blue-winged teal blew down in that. From Canada, just kind of riding that cold front is kind of the way I like to look at it. So, I've always known that the blue-winged teal, they get an early start, they come into Texas, Louisiana, and then ultimately end up in South America. I also thought that the pintails, the mallards, the widgeons, and gadwalls and whatnot, being puddle ducks, that they were not as susceptible to that first early cold, but I figured that. When there was a substantial cool down or snow or whatnot, they'd get moving. But according to the experts, that may not necessarily be the case. In fact, it sounds as though, they're really only going to go as far as they need to. And of course, that makes sense. It amazes me, some of these seasons where we have we're covered up in ducks, like 2000, like last year, 2019 for me was phenomenal. I had a ton of ducks, both divers and puddle ducks, and it is amazing to me to think, I had that many ducks in my little area of Texas. You can imagine how many were north of me, right? Up in the other states where they didn't have to go as far. So I think that is really kind of an interesting deal he wrote here. He also wrote, in fact, recent research publications that model both climate and bird distributions indicate that by 2050, the core of mallard wintering ranges may extend from Nebraska eastward to the Great Lake regions. AKA, it sounds as though the mallards and the pintails may not have to go as far south because the winters are not as harsh. Obviously, that would be absolutely devastating for a lot of the big greenhead guys out there. For me, I've always been an equal opportunity killer. I'll kill just about anything. I prefer teal, but hey, whatever flies in my way will definitely be there. So, very, very interesting. Something else and this really didn't have anything to do with weather, but could definitely affect the bird population. I was reading an article. It was talking about Canada and Canada not letting. This is a horrible summation, but the Canadian government wasn't allowing hunters in, or wasn't allowing people into Canada because of COVID, not necessarily hunters. So they were saying that a lot of the folks that go up to Canada to eat the syrup and to wear plaid and talk like this, and to shoot a lot of waterfowl weren't going to be doing that this much. They were talking about the Dakotas being absolutely jammed with hunters this year. So it'll be interesting to see if that comes to fruition. And one of the things he talks about here is pressure, and the fact that the birds will definitely react to pressure and they will get the heck out of there if they feel it. So the next subtopic we have here is called landscape change and variation. And he basically goes on to preach the story of the ducks and loon that's been saying since their creation, that the past 200 years, the loss of habitat, wetlands, has just been absolutely horrendous. Of course, as we all know, waterfowl organizations like Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl are doing everything in their power to restore wetlands. Obviously, that is such a key issue for us as hunters, because you got to conserve the bird that you shoot. A very, very interesting little piece here. You'll have to excuse me. I'm trying to read here and talk at the same time. But one of the largest areas that he mentions in here, the wintering ground that's really been devastated, is the coastal Louisiana area. And it says, perhaps the most discouraging loss of wetlands important to wintering waterfowl have been in coastal Louisiana, where more than 40% of the state's approximately 3 million acres of marsh has disappeared over the past decades. Large portions of remaining coastal wetlands have been invaded by non-invasive plants, including, I have no clue, Hyachicta and giant salvia, which is not a good food resource for the ducks. It goes on to talk a little bit about as an example of Louisiana suffering, the resident mottled duck, which is like a black-looking duck that's native to Louisiana and Texas, hadn't been there the past couple of years, and they're talking about the decline of that species being because of this habitat loss. I'd be really honest. In my opinion, if there's going to be a habitat issue, probably the best place to have it is going to be in Louisiana and Texas. And I say that because there are so many avid hunters and waterfowlers in those two states combined that I am confident with with a little bit of help and a little bit of luck, we can certainly do some great things to restore those wetlands, because obviously Southerners in general, but Texans, Louisianans, we really appreciate and we value tremendously those wildlife resources. So I've had to guess, I'd say there'd be some folks that may be a little a little bit upset about that piece. But he's the doctor, so I guess he knows what he's talking about, right? They also go on to talk about how not only have millions of wetlands been destroyed, but a lot of other wildlife habitats have been converted to agriculture. Obviously, that's kind of, as I always say, a double-edged sword, right? And it says right here, some waterfowl such as geese, mallards, pintails, green-winged teal, widgeon, wood ducks have learned to exploit, harvest rice, corn, wheat, barley, peas, and lentils. Obviously, that's been a gigantic food source for them, and that's why a lot of places such as Lubbock, home of the Texas Tech Red Raiders, and in Amarillo have become so popular, or have always been so popular, waterfowl destinations because of the corn and winter wheat and the other cereal grains, as they say, they've got up there. And it's become very, very popular up there. But, they're saying that I guess that some of these ducks can't really adapt to them. In fact, I would have to say that probably the diver ducks obviously would not be affected by that because they're not, I guess, not really what they choose to eat per se. So, moving along here, and let's see. It talks more about seed eaters. Yeah, so it also talks, and this isn't very good news for us down here in the South, but it says farther north there have been significant increases in the amount of corn agriculture, particularly in North and South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. Not historically a common crop in North Dakota. Today, corn is grown as far north as Manitoba, thanks to developments of varieties that mature faster in shorter, cooler growing seasons. In recent years, there have been up to 55 million acres of corn planted in the Mississippi River Basin, with millions of acres harvested wheat, barley, sorghum, and other landscape. Abundance of waste grains is available to migrating waterfowl, especially if it's not covered in snow. So what he's basically talking about there is that, again, going back to what he originally started with, is the fact is that if the ducks and the geese don't have to go south all the way to Texas coast or into Mexico, wherever it may be, they're not going to need to. And they're talking about the change in these agricultural practices in some of these, I call them square states, okay, that South Dakota, North Dakota, Kansas, Minnesota, and whatnot, that, the birds, instead of having to fly, I'm just throwing out a number here, 5,000 miles, they only have to fly 400 miles. Because they got everything they need there. So obviously that's potentially going to be an issue for us down here in the South. The next topic here is weather and landscape interactions. And let's see here. It says changes in the amount of types of crops and the trend towards warmer winters are likely enabling waterfowl to winter further north or at least delay the fall migration. I can tell you an example of that. We were speaking to our friends at Lifetime Decoys. I think it was last year, talking about. In fact, I think maybe it was the end of this year, actually, or excuse me, the end of last year. Talking about the duck migration and whatnot, and those guys are real big coastal hunters on the Texas coast. And of course, as we all know, when you think of the Texas coast, what species do you think of primarily? What's the redhead? The redheads, being a diver duck, they love those marshes and whatnot along the Texas coast. And he was talking about how because we just didn't have that cold air to bring those redheads down all the way down there. That is, they just didn't have any. They just weren't there, and they normally show up in thousands. So that was definitely a weather caused issue. Now, up where Rancho Bandito was, it was funny. It was quite the opposite. We actually were covered up in redheads. Just a really, really, really cool sight to see, to look out there and see all those diver ducks. We get lots of ringnecks and scalps and whatnot, but when the redheads get out there, they really kind of add a color to the gray gloomy cold out there, which. Given today. Well, today was 93, so it wasn't that bad, but I sure like to think about that gray and cold days on hot days such as this. So the next topic is wetland restoration. And it says in the past 50 years, significant wetland restoration has occurred, though the number of restored acres pales in comparison to what's been lost. Yes, yes, yes. That is very much so, in my opinion, a glass half empty statement. But obviously, you're going to kind of get that. When you read these publications, at least it's been my experience, they are produced by conservation societies. You're not going to hear, oh, everything is great, we're doing just fine, thanks, how are you? Because obviously they're out there trying to spread awareness and tell everybody what's going on. So anyway, that's just my little opinion there. But yeah, no, obviously Ducks Unlimited and on Delta Waterfowl and whatnot have done a great job in working with corporate entities and private individuals to restore wetlands and to really make a difference. And I tell you, in my opinion, it's kind of one of the frustrating things being a landowner myself, that it's really tough for me to work on duck habitat, and that's because I don't have the ability to control water on Rancho Bandito. I can't do it. I literally have to do rain dances, or I'd have to bring in some sort of 8 bajillion ton water tank system. I don't have the ability to flood fields and do that kind of thing. So it's frustrating for me because there's not a lot that I can do. I guess really as a private landowner, when you can't control the water, and it's been a great question for DU actually, or Delta Waterfowl. What can you do to help wetland restorations on your property, or on your hunting lease or ranch and whatnot? What can we do besides donate money and go to the and buy dogs and all that kind of fun stuff? So I'll tell you, that would be an interesting question to ask them. Okay, so we're gonna bypass that one. We're gonna go to a good one. This one's called hunting pressure. This has been a big one that I've always talked about, and I really think out of all the bird species we hunt, the ducks really seem to react to the hunting pressure the worst, as far as the humans are concerned, right? For the people hunting them. And I swear it's because those ducks are just absolutely smart as they can be. And I've always said that, typically in the beginning of the season, I go with a little bit bigger spreads, and you can get away with some bad calling and whatnot. By the end of January, I've got no motion decoys out. I've got, 3 or 4 decoys out there at the most. I'm camo head to toe, and I don't even take my calls out anymore. Absolutely not, because the ducks are that skittish that I just tend to really screw it up. So here's a little piece. I'm going to read this whole thing because I think it's really good. It says, while hunting pressure is probably the least understood variable in waterfowl distribution equation, we do know that ducks and geese do not like disturbance and will abandon heavily disturbed areas for places where they can find food and rest. Furthermore, hunting has changed in the past decades. Advances in equipment and technology have made it easier to access nearly all places waterfowl are found. Many hunters have purchased or leased land that is intensively managed to attract waterfowl for hunting, leading to more often high quality habitat on many landscapes. Hunters commonly use motion decoys and machines that keep wetlands from freezing in cold weather. Regulations enable multiple split seasons, and any given state means that waterfowl are subject to more hunting pressure in mid-Atlantic. I have no idea what that is. I think it's mid-Atlantic, but that doesn't make sense. And southern states. The effect of this interaction of these variables are poorly understood. However, the surest way to lower the quality of hunting in your favorite duck holes is disturb the birds too often. Ducks will simply not tolerate intense disturbance while will readily relocate to other areas, sometimes far away. Boy, oh boy, that is so true. I have, when I'm at Rancho Bandito in the winter for extended periods of time, especially during the dry years, it's tough because, I'm really limited on where I can hunt. And I know that, if I go down there and I shoot that tank, one morning, and if I say, oh gosh, I'm gonna go back the next morning, I'm looking at least a half. The hunt will be half as good. Now that is unless I've got a cold front coming through, things of that nature. So you really got to be disciplined. You don't want to shoot all those ducks out, because I believe, especially early in the season, that if you get a shot at if you day one, okay, and it's earlier in the season, and you've had some birds come in and you missed it, or you shot too early or whatnot, regardless, they left. I believe that they'll come back that following day, so long as everything's right, and of course they haven't been pushed out further. But if you continually beat up that water and you're constantly there, that is definitely an issue, obviously. Let's see here. The next topic talks about the annual waterfowl production. I'll summarize it for you. Basically, it says to achieve. Well, I'm actually not gonna. I'll read it to you. To achieve greater satisfaction from your hunting season, my best advice is to temper your expectation based on the waterfowl breeding populations, and then temper your expectations further based on fall and winter weather to the north of your blind. So basically what he's talking about is, when we all, and I think a lot of waterfowl hunters, myself included, will look at the numbers and say, oh, the mallards are up this year, and you kind of get giddy and excited, thinking, oh my gosh, well, we're going to have a bunch more mallards. Well, of course that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have more mallards on your tank or on your lake that you're hunting. Really, when it all boils down to it, he kind of concludes, and that basically he says the waterfowl are very adapted to exploit highly variable environments, and that is part of what makes them such a worthy quarry. For those of us who love to pursue ducks and geese, the best way forward is to provide quality habitat, minimize disturbance as much as possible, and hope for some help from Old Man Winter. And boy, that is the absolute truth. I always talk about, especially now, this is you could call it late August if you want to, talking about dove hunting, and I'm already looking, okay, what's temperature in Kansas? Did it go down 10 degrees? If it did, maybe there are birds on the way, but I especially, when it comes to ducks, and apparently Dr. Mormon did the exact same thing. He says that he hunts in Mississippi, but he looks at the weather forecast in Saskatchewan, which is kind of crazy because, he knows that when they got snow and all that kind of stuff, that that the birds are going to make their way south. So it's funny, with all the science and all the money and everything else that we put into understanding the ducks, it's really, what makes ducks ducks are their basic needs. And to make a good, to be able to hunt them smartly, we've got to think about habitat. We've got to think about, food and what they need to survive. And we've also got to remember that, especially for us down south, that if we just don't get that cold weather, they're not going to be here. And I think that article did a really good job of pointing all that kind of stuff out. So again, the name of the article is Our Waterfowl Migration's Changing. It's by Ducks Unlimited, by their chief, by DU's chief scientist, Dr. Tom Mormon. And I highly recommend you guys look it up. You probably can read it instead of listening to my jibber jabber. But anyways, another great article, and looking forward to a great dove. Looking forward to a great dove season. Spring teal season's coming up darn near a month from now, which I just cannot even tell you how excited I am. I'll be going to Rancho Bandito here shortly, and I am hoping that my main tank is not completely dried up to where it's going to make it very difficult to go after one of my favorite quarries. I absolutely love teal. They are a treasure, and the early teal season is just an absolute ball. So we'll be talking more about that here in the coming weeks. So anyways, folks, that is it for me tonight. Thank you all so much for your continued listenership. We really appreciate it. And as always, folks, support your local feed store.
Thanks for listening to the Feed Bandit podcast. If you like what we discuss on the show, be sure to sign up to our email list to get even more killer hunting ideas, tips, tricks, and exclusive deals on innovative hunting gear and services delivered straight to your inbox. Sign up over at feedbandit.com or simply by texting the word bandit to 33777. See you on the next one, and remember, support your local feed store.